The ocean can look calm, endless, and inviting. But beneath its shimmering surface lurk predators capable of turning a moment of fun into a fight for survival. In this video, you'll witness 6 terrifying encounters, from a fisherman in South Africa discovering a diver inside a dead great white, to an oil platform diver in Angola, caught in the jaws of a massive great white. On the morning of March 14, 2017, Marcus Langley, a seasoned fisherman with more than 20 years of navigating the jagged coastline of Gansbaai, South Africa, set out before sunrise, the sky a thin wash of gray light over restless, churning water. At 42, he had spent countless hours hauling nets and checking traps along this stretch, where the cold Atlantic swells met the rocky shoreline in a brutal embrace, and he knew every current, every submerged reef, and every hidden channel. He prided himself on his knowledge of the sea, on the instinct that had kept him safe through storms that had swallowed younger, less careful men, but even he could not have predicted the scene awaiting him that morning. Marcus's small, weather-beaten fishing boat cut through the swells as he steered toward his net lines, the diesel engine thumping against the rhythm of the waves. The wind carried the scent of salt and kelp, tangling with the faint, coppery smell of old fish in the hold. His eyes scanned the horizon, catching familiar shapes of kelp beds and the distant shadow of rocks beneath the water, when something unnatural caught his attention. A massive dark form drifting just beneath the surface, its outline irregular, strangely bloated, and grotesque. He slowed the engine, squinting, his stomach tightening as he maneuvered closer, the water churning around the hull. It took him a moment to register the truth. The shadow was a great white shark, roughly 18 feet long, floating belly up in the surf, its massive head lolling unnaturally, skin marred with abrasions and gills still twitching slightly in a last futile gasp. Marcus's breath hitched as he realized the body was not merely dead but disturbed, swollen with gas, and something protruded from its distended belly. A shiver ran down his spine as the unmistakable shape of a human arm emerged, pale against the shadowed cavity, fingers stiff and unnerving in their position. Marcus recoiled, a wave of nausea threatening to overtake him as he fumbled for his radio, hands trembling despite years of bracing himself against danger at sea. He called the local authorities, his voice tight, controlled yet betraying the shock that gripped him, explaining that a shark had been found floating near his nets and that something about it suggested human involvement. He watched as the current tugged at the bloated body, waves slapping against the hull, and could not bring himself to look away. Even after decades on the water, he felt an instinctive fear, a recognition that the ocean, for all its beauty and bounty, held terrors few survived. By mid-morning, a team of investigators and marine specialists arrived, their small boat cutting through the choppy swells, ropes, and knives at the ready. Marcus guided them to the shark, which swayed with the tide, the once majestic predator now grotesque and bloated, its mouth slightly agape, revealing teeth stained with remnants of flesh. The team worked carefully, hands gloved, knives slicing through tough hide and layers of tissue, and Marcus stayed back, unable to bring himself closer, stomach twisting at the stench of salt, decay, and something far fouler. As they pried open the shark's belly, the full horror became apparent. Inside lay the remains of a missing diver, his body tangled in scuba gear that had become entwined in the predator's stomach. The diver's mask had fused with the skull, lenses clouded, and the outline of his regulator and fins was unmistakable, a stark reminder of the sudden, violent encounter that had led to this grotesque tableau. Teeth marks marred the diver's limbs, jagged rips and punctures suggesting a violent struggle, a desperate fight that had been hopeless against the strength and ferocity of the great white. Marcus felt bile rise as he stared at the scene. The reality of death in its rawest form laid bare before him, a brutal testament to the power of the ocean's apex predators. Even the veteran investigators recoiled, murmuring to one another in low, professional tones, their hands steady, but their eyes betraying the gravity of what they had found. The smell was overpowering, a pungent mixture of salt, blood, and decomposing flesh, lingering in the air and clinging to clothing and hair. Marcus's stomach churned as he stepped back, the deck beneath his boots slick with seawater and fragments of marine life disturbed during the procedure. He could not erase the image of the diver's hand, partially digested, protruding from the shark, nor the silent, cruel expression frozen on the predator's head as if it had been caught in a moment of both hunger and triumph. In the hours that followed, Marcus found himself unable to speak, his mind replaying every detail. the swollen body drifting in the surf, the jagged teeth marks along the diver's limbs, the gas-filled carcass moving with the waves, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that pervaded the scene. He thought of the ocean as he had always known it, a place of livelihood and danger intertwined. But now he felt it anew, as something darker, something capable of sudden, inexplicable violence. The sea had always demanded respect, but on that morning it had offered Marcus a glimpse of the abyss, of what lurked beneath, indifferent to the fragile lives of those who dared venture into its depths. As the sun rose higher, burning away the fog and illuminating the swell-strewn waters, Marcus felt a lingering unease settle in his chest, a knot of fear that would not loosen. Even after the authorities had taken the shark for further study and removed the diver's remains, he could not shake the image, haunted by the raw, unfiltered power of nature, and the terrifying reminder that beneath the ocean's surface, life and death existed on a scale few could comprehend. For Marcus, the morning would remain vivid forever. The shadow in the surf, the arm protruding from the predator's belly, the grotesque beauty of a creature that ruled the seas, and the knowledge that the ocean held horrors that few survived and fewer ever witnessed with their own eyes. On a sun-drenched afternoon in July 2024, the turquoise waters off Ayia Napa, Cyprus, shimmered under a sky so clear it seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. And 6 tourists laughed, their voices carrying over the waves as they bounced across the sea on a bright yellow inflatable banana boat. Among them was 19-year-old Chloe Wright, a British student experiencing her first summer away from home, her hair slick with seawater and her sunburned shoulders gleaming as she clung tightly to the handles. The group's carefree chatter and the rhythmic slap of the banana boat against the swell masked the hidden danger beneath the sparkling surface, a predator gliding silently, perfectly adapted to the clear waters that invited fun but also concealed risk. The inflatable bounced and twisted as the speedboat tugged it across the waves, sending spray over the passengers, laughter erupting with every sudden dip or lift. Chloe's heart raced with exhilaration, a mixture of thrill and nervousness that came with the reckless joy of youth. The others shouted and hooted, gripping the boat with white-knuckled excitement as the current tugged them toward deeper water. The afternoon sun warmed their skin, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed simple, suspended in pure, unthinking happiness. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The banana boat struck an unseen swell at an awkward angle, flipping violently in the surge, and the 6 friends were hurled into the water in a chaos of screaming, splashing, and flailing limbs. Chloe's stomach lurched as she tumbled beneath the waves, her ears filled with the roar of the sea, her lungs screaming for air as she fought to break the surface. Salt water stung her eyes and filled her mouth, and panic flared when she realized the group had scattered, each person struggling to stay afloat in the sudden, disorienting turmoil. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, a raw, burning energy that sharpened her senses even as terror gripped her chest. Then a blur of movement streaked beneath her, sleek and silver, cutting through the water with a speed that seemed impossible. A short-fin mako, barely visible against the sunlit sea, struck with sudden violence. Its jaws clamped onto Chloe's calf with crushing force, twisting as if to test her strength, and the pain exploded through her body in sharp, blinding waves. Blood clouded the once crystal water, a vivid ribbon that spread outward, mingling with foam and spray. And Chloe instinctively thrashed, trying to break free from the predator's grip, her fingers clawing at the slick, powerful body that refused to release her. Around her, the other tourists kicked and screamed, scrambling over the overturned inflatable in desperate attempts to escape or aid one another, hearts hammering in disbelief as the idyllic summer ride became a maelstrom of fear. The water churned with panic, the rhythmic slap of waves now punctuated by frantic thrashing and shouted warnings, the laughter of minutes ago replaced with raw, unfiltered terror. The speedboat's driver reacted instantly, circling back toward the chaos, engine churning the surface, propellers slicing through the water to create a barrier between predator and passengers, each rotation of the blades sending up plumes of white spray and noise that startled the shark, forcing it to release Chloe at last. She tumbled free, limbs weak and trembling, blood streaming from the jagged wound along her lower leg, a shock of pain mixed with disbelief that her calf was still attached. The driver reached her, hands steady despite the urgency, hauling her aboard with the others who had clung desperately to the overturned banana boat. Chloe's teeth were clenched, her body pale and trembling, as adrenaline and shock mingled with relief, and the driver shouted instructions to keep pressure on the wound while steering back toward the shore, the small craft skimming across the waves in a tense, high-speed flight from danger. Once on land, the scene remained chaotic. Tourists and bystanders gathered, their faces pale as they glimpsed the mangled leg, the blood-stained water lapping at the beach, and the overturned inflatable bobbing gently in the surf. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, their professionalism evident, but even among trained responders, the urgency was palpable as they worked to stabilize Chloe, applying dressings, oxygen, and intravenous lines, the air thick with the mingled scent of salt, antiseptic, and fear. Hours of surgery followed, meticulous, painstaking work to repair tissue, tendons, and bone, a desperate fight to preserve what was left of her leg after the shark's violent bite. Witnesses later described the scene in hushed, incredulous tones, still replaying the sudden transformation of carefree fun into a nightmare within seconds. Friends spoke of the speedboat driver's quick thinking, of Chloe's luck in surviving what could have been fatal, of the chaotic dance of water, limbs, and teeth that had erupted without warning. The shortfin mako, nature's swift and efficient hunter, had struck with perfect timing, its presence in the azure shallows a silent, lethal threat that few expected in such a recreational setting. A reminder that the ocean's predators operated under rules utterly indifferent to human pleasure or safety. Chloe's recovery would be long, the physical scars permanent, yet the mental weight lingered even more, the vivid memory of her leg being seized, of the water turning red around her, of the frantic chaos that had swept through her friends. Each glance at the sea now carried tension, a wary respect for forces that could shift from playful to lethal in moments. The story of that afternoon spread quickly among locals and tourists, a cautionary tale of how swiftly the ocean could turn, and how even a shallow, sunlit sea could conceal a predator capable of violence beyond imagination. As night fell over Ayia Napa, the waters glinting with reflected moonlight, Chloe lay in her hospital bed, pale and bandaged, the events of the day replaying endlessly in her mind, a relentless loop of terror, pain, and survival. For the 6 tourists, the summer ride had ended not in laughter, but in a confrontation with raw, unfiltered nature, and a lesson seared into memory, that the ocean, beautiful and inviting, could harbor horrors that struck without warning, leaving only the fractured calm of the surface and the lingering echo of chaos beneath. February 4, 2023 was a gray morning. The offshore oil platform off the coast of Luanda, Angola, loomed over the restless Atlantic, its steel structure towering above waves that churned with constant motion. The platform's crew had begun their scheduled maintenance dives, and 30-year-old diver Carlos Mendez, a veteran of numerous offshore operations, prepared for descent, checking the regulators, tanks, and welding equipment with methodical care. At 29, he had faced strong currents, poor visibility, and mechanical failures underwater countless times. Yet the ocean beneath the rig remained unpredictable, a dark, shifting world where even experience offered only partial protection. Carlos and his 2 teammates slipped into the murky water, the platform receding into a haze above, metal beams fading into shadowed depths as particles swirled in the torchlight. Welding torches sputtered faint orange sparks through the gloom, illuminating the corroded steel and rough edges of the structure, creating a fragile island of visibility in a world dominated by darkness. The water was thick with silt, suspended debris, and the faint scent of salt mingled with oil, an atmosphere both alien and threatening, where each movement carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Suddenly, a shadow emerged from the gloom, moving with precision and silence, its form massive and unmistakable. A great white shark, estimated at 17 feet in length, gliding directly toward the divers. Its approach was sudden, the water exploding around Carlos as the predator slammed into his tank, the impact jarring his chest and dislodging the regulator from his mouth in a rush of panic and choking seawater. Pain and shock collided, and instinct forced him to scramble, flailing as the cold, oppressive water filled his lungs and ears, the metallic taste of panic mixing with the salt. Carlos fumbled for his backup regulator, every movement complicated by the force pressing against him. The massive body of the shark now coiled for another strike. Without warning, its jaws clamped onto his side, crushing with a force that drove the air from his lungs and sent waves of agony radiating through his torso. Ribs fractured under the pressure, muscle shredded, and he writhed in a desperate, twisting motion, struggling to break free from the relentless grip of teeth designed to tear, shred, and crush. Blood clouded the water around him, mingling with the particulate haze, as he felt the predator's power and precision with a clarity that was terrifying in its intimacy. His teammates reacted immediately, torches swinging in wide arcs, showering sparks through the water in an attempt to repel the predator. Each spark was a brief flare in the darkness, a sudden burst of light and heat against the glinting scales of the shark, forcing it to recoil slightly before testing its grip again. Carlos's body convulsed with pain. Every breath a battle, his mind focused on survival. On the desperate hope of returning to the safety of the dive cage, the steel confines that offered a temporary barrier between him and the apex predator. The predator struck again, crushing with an impact that sent shockwaves through Carlos's chest, grinding teeth against the metal of his tank in a sound that would be seared into his memory forever. He could feel the vibrations through his ribs, the harsh pressure of jaws intent on shredding what flesh it could reach. Pain was absolute and unrelenting, yet clarity emerged through sheer will, every second measured in survival, every breath counted as the torches continued to flare and hiss in the water, deterring the great white just enough to allow Carlos to maneuver toward the cage. At last, with the shark momentarily startled by sparks and movement, Carlos was able to grasp the platform's cage, pulling himself toward the mesh with trembling limbs, shredded and slick with blood. The divers inside reached through, hands gripping him, hauling him into the relative security of the metal enclosure, where the ocean's fury was finally kept at bay by cold steel bars. He collapsed inside, chest heaving, vision blurred, the metallic taste of blood and salt filling his mouth as shock mingled with relief. The great white circled once beneath the cage before vanishing into the murky depths, leaving only the lingering horror of its power and precision in its wake. Back on the platform, emergency protocols unfolded with swift efficiency. Carlos was lifted from the water, blood streaming, wounds deep and jagged, yet he remained conscious, recounting the experience in a low, steady voice despite the trauma, emphasizing the grinding sound of the shark's teeth against his tank, the sensation of its power pressing through the water and bone, and the surreal, intimate terror of being caught so completely in its jaws. Colleagues and medical personnel worked with urgency, stabilizing him and preparing for evacuation, their movements precise but tinged with the anxiety that came from witnessing a man nearly torn apart in one of the most unexpected places imaginable. The attack sent shockwaves through the offshore industry. Workers and supervisors alike shared stories of the incident with a mixture of disbelief and grim respect, recognizing that even the towering steel-enforced confines of a modern oil platform offered no true immunity against the ocean's apex predators. Dive teams discussed protocols, emergency response measures, and the fragility of human flesh against a predator evolved for efficiency and lethality. The memory of Carlos's narrow survival, a stark reminder of the ocean's unpredictable, uncompromising danger. Carlos's recovery was painstaking. Hours of surgery repaired fractured ribs, deep lacerations, and shredded muscle, every stitch a testament to both human skill and resilience. Yet, beyond the physical trauma, the psychological impact lingered. The vivid recall of the shark's speed, the power in its jaws, the metallic vibration of teeth against steel, and the fleeting sensation of helplessness in a world that seemed both familiar and suddenly alien. For months, the hum of machinery and the roar of the sea triggered involuntary memories of that attack, a reminder that even the most controlled environments could be invaded by forces indifferent to human planning or precaution. By the time he returned to duty, Carlos carried scars visible and invisible, a man who had survived an encounter that might have been fatal in almost any other circumstance, and yet he knew the ocean had offered no apology for its instinctive, lethal behavior. The story spread among offshore crews as both a cautionary tale and a grim legend, a vivid reminder that in the depths around even the most fortified rigs, predators like the great white remained rulers, undeterred by steel, indifferent to schedules, and capable of turning routine maintenance into a confrontation with death. On the morning of September 12, 2023, the Red Sea off Egypt glimmered beneath the rising sun, its surface a shifting mirror of turquoise and sapphire, while a squad of paratroopers carried out routine training exercises above the water. Among them, 21-year-old Malik Hassan, a disciplined and fit soldier with experience in desert and coastal operations, prepared for descent, harness secured and parachute lines checked with methodical care. The exercise was meant to simulate rapid insertion into coastal zones, a controlled scenario with safety crews stationed on rafts below, ready to recover any trainees who drifted beyond the designated drop area. Strong winds swept across the coast that morning, twisting and tugging at parachute lines as soldiers leapt from the aircraft, their canopies billowing and jerking in response. Malik descended with focus, eyes scanning the water and horizon for reference points, the wind snapping and whistling in his ears, and the surface rushing toward him in an endless, shimmering expanse. Moments later, a sudden gust pulled his chute off course, spinning him violently and pushing him far beyond the drop zone into open water where no immediate help awaited. His feet broke the surface with a jarring splash, salt water choking his lungs as he struggled to keep his head above waves that rose and fell with deceptive calm. The turbulent motion drew attention, not only from his fellow paratroopers but from creatures below, hidden beneath the sun-dappled surface. Malik's thrashing and the ripples of panic carried through the water, catching the interest of an oceanic white-tip shark, a predator noted for its curiosity and willingness to investigate unusual activity in the open sea. From the shadowed depths, the shark approached, sleek and powerful, its fins cutting through the water with silent efficiency. A living embodiment of speed and predatory instinct, its gaze locked on the figure struggling against the waves. Without warning, the shark struck, its jaws clamped onto Malik's calf with crushing precision, pain exploding instantly through his lower leg, a shockwave of agony accompanied by the cold, unforgiving pressure of the predator's bite. The wetsuit tore under the force, skin shredded, and Malik felt himself yanked beneath the surface, the thrum of panic in his chest amplified by the shock of salt water rushing into his mouth and nose. He kicked violently, trying to free himself, every movement a desperate calculation against the immense strength of the apex predator. And for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the grinding force of teeth, the jerking drag underwater, and the scream that rose unbidden from his throat. Nearby, fellow paratroopers reacted immediately. Paddles striking water, flotation devices flung with frantic accuracy, and voices shouting warnings across the waves. The shark twisted Malik beneath the surface, testing his resistance. But the disruption from multiple directions, combined with the sudden flashes of rafts, paddles, and splashing, forced it to recoil slightly. Sparks of hope surged through Malik's mind as he clung to consciousness, muscles screaming in pain, blood trailing in ribbons through the water mixing with salt and shadow to create a chaotic swirl of red and foam. For tense minutes the struggle continued. Malik thrashed to keep his head above water, the shark testing him with repeated bites, each impact a brutal reminder of nature's raw power. His fellow soldiers coordinated instinctively, encircling him, their rafts forming a barrier, paddles striking toward the predator with sharp, deliberate strokes, and flotation devices shoved into its path to interrupt its focus. Finally, the shark released its grip, retreating into the open sea with a final flick of its powerful tail, leaving Malik gasping, bloodied and shaken, floating amid turbulent waves as adrenaline and shock mingled with the burning pain along his leg. The rescue team moved quickly, pulling him onto a nearby boat, hands steady despite the tension, wrapping tourniquets and applying pressure to deep puncture wounds and lacerations that sliced through muscle and tissue. Malik's breath came in ragged gasps as he assessed the damage, noting with grim awareness the severity of the injuries, the vivid trails of blood, and the impossibility of ignoring the trauma he had endured. He remained conscious throughout, recounting the attack internally, the image of the shark's jaws, the sensation of twisting under immense force, and the sudden stark realization that even in carefully controlled exercises, the ocean could strike without warning. Emergency crews on shore were alerted immediately, stabilizing him further, transporting him swiftly to a hospital where surgeons labored for hours to repair shredded muscle, deep punctures, and torn tendons. Weeks of hospitalization followed, each day a test of endurance and healing, both physically and mentally, as Malik recovered from the violence of the encounter. The attack left scars visible and hidden, reminders of vulnerability in a world dominated by forces indifferent to human skill, preparation, or intent. Among his squad, the story became an enduring lesson. Training routines were adjusted, safety protocols reviewed, and the unpredictability of apex predators emphasized repeatedly. The Red Sea incident serving as a sobering reminder that even controlled conditions could not shield one from instinctive, opportunistic threats. For Malik, the memory remained vivid. The sudden strike, The twisting jerk of his body underwater, the searing pain of teeth tearing through wetsuit and flesh, and the surreal relief when he was finally hauled onto the rescue boat, bloodied, battered, and barely believing he had survived. Though he returned to active duty months later, the attack lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the ocean's omnipresent risk. The fragility of human flesh against creatures evolved for efficiency and lethality, and the sharp, unfiltered reality that apex predators could appear even where safety was assumed. Each glance at open water carried a trace of caution, a recognition that beneath even the sunlit waves, danger could arrive without warning, turning routine training into life-threatening peril in a heartbeat. By the time Malik left the hospital, the Red Sea attack had become both personal trauma and professional legend, a vivid example for paratroopers and divers alike of the unpredictability of the sea and its hunters, a story told with hushed respect for the predator that had struck and for the man who had survived by nothing more than instinct, courage, and the swift response of those around him. On the morning of May 21, 2022, the waters off La Digue, Seychelles, glittered like molten turquoise under a cloudless sky. Warm currents swirling around the coral reef that had drawn tourists from across the globe. Among them was 33-year-old Clara Stein, a German traveler with a lifelong fascination for marine life, who had snorkeled extensively in oceans from the Caribbean to the Pacific. Clara moved gracefully through the shallows, her fins slicing through the water as she trailed two green turtles, careful not to disturb their slow, deliberate glide along the reef. The GoPro she carried bobbed lightly beside her, recording every bubble, every flicker of sunlight on sand and coral, her own voice narrating the peaceful scene with calm delight. The ocean seemed tranquil, almost timeless, a world of light, color, and gentle motion, yet beneath the sparkling surface, danger waited. Clara remained focused on the turtles, unaware of the shadow moving below, sleek and powerful, an apex predator that had observed her presence with acute awareness. In an instant, the peaceful tableau was shattered. A tiger shark, 13 feet long, surged upward from the reef with alarming speed, its streamlined body cutting through water as if propelled by unseen force. Clara felt the rush before she saw it, the sudden displacement of water, the shadow spreading beneath her like a dark stain across sunlit blue. The shark struck with brutal efficiency, clamping its jaws around her torso, lifting her partially out of the water and thrashing side to side with terrifying strength. Pain exploded across her body, ribs bending under pressure, flesh tearing as she was jerked violently, the ocean boiling around her in white spray and bubbles. Her GoPro spun free, recording a fragmented, muffled account of screams and chaos, the lens catching glimpses of blood clouding the once clear shallows. Clara's lungs burned, her arms paddled instinctively, trying to push the predator away, yet every motion seemed almost inconsequential against the sheer power she faced. Her friends, just a few meters away, shouted in panic, splashing frantically, waving arms and gesturing toward rescue. But none dared approach the shark directly, understanding instinctively that its size and strength could easily turn their intervention into disaster. Their voices mingled with the roar of water displaced by the thrashing predator, a cacophony of fear, urgency, and helplessness. Clara's mind focused sharply despite the trauma, cataloging sensations, the twisting pressure around her ribs, the sharp tearing of skin, the sting of salt water mixed with blood, as instinct and sheer will drove her to survive. Locals, responding quickly, launched small boats from the shore, paddles and improvised implements striking the water in rapid arcs, creating waves, splashes, and visual distractions. The tiger shark recoiled from repeated impacts, snapping its head toward the disturbances before circling back, testing its prey again. Each strike forced Clara to adjust, clinging to consciousness, muscles trembling with fatigue and pain, lungs burning as she fought against the relentless assault. For what seemed an eternity, the ocean was transformed from paradise to battleground, the predator's power fully on display against the fragile human body suspended in its domain. Finally, after tense minutes of coordinated effort, the shark released her, retreating into deeper water with a final, forceful flick of its tail, leaving Clara floating amid a swirl of blood, salt, and relief. Her body sagged in the water, ribs shattered, deep lacerations across her abdomen bleeding heavily, and every breath a sharp reminder of the violence she had endured. Local rescuers hauled her aboard one of the small boats, hands steady despite the evident shock, applying pressure to wounds, stabilizing her as the craft cut through the shallow waves toward the shore. Her friends leaned over her, faces pale with worry, unable to speak, their relief tempered by the visceral reminder of the predator that had vanished only moments before. Once on shore, emergency crews moved rapidly, transferring her onto a larger vessel for airlift to Mahe, where surgeons awaited. Every second was critical, as blood loss, shock, and trauma combined to create a perilous scenario. Hours of surgery followed, meticulous work to repair shattered ribs, deep abdominal lacerations, and damaged tissue, each incision a battle to preserve life against the brutal toll inflicted by the predator's bite. Medical staff later described the procedures as complex and demanding, yet Clara remained conscious, her resilience and instinct having carried her through the immediate threat and into human care. The attack left lasting impressions on all who witnessed it. The once idyllic snorkeling site was forever altered in memory, the turquoise waters no longer purely inviting, but tinged with the knowledge of what had lurked unseen. Clara's friends recounted every detail in quiet tones, the rapid succession of events, the sudden eruption of violence, and the coordination required to save her from further injury. For the locals who intervened, the encounter underscored the unpredictable nature of apex predators, their behavior calculated, efficient, and indifferent to human expectation or presence. Clara's recovery extended over weeks, both physical and mental, as she healed from wounds that cut deep and scars that would remain visible. Yet even beyond the physical trauma, the memory of the shark's jaws, the thrashing, the sudden weight and force pressing against her torso, and the chaotic swirl of blood and water lingered in her consciousness. Each glance at the ocean reminded her of the fragile line separating leisure from disaster, of the power that moved silently beneath sunlit waves, and of the skill, timing, and courage required to survive against nature's most efficient hunters. When she finally returned to normal life, the attack remained a defining experience, shaping not only her perception of the ocean, but also a cautious respect for its inhabitants. Among tourists and divers, her story circulated as a chilling testament to the reality of apex predators in tropical waters, a vivid example of how swiftly paradise could transform into peril, and how survival demanded a combination of instinct, resilience, and timely intervention. The day off La Digue would never be forgotten. The turquoise waters forever marked in memory by the predator's strike, the violence endured, and the extraordinary human survival against forces beyond comprehension. On the evening of June 18, 2021, the waters off Bimini, Bahamas, shimmered beneath the gold and crimson glow of sunset, the sky streaked with the last warm light of day. 29-year-old Elise Tremblay, a Canadian tourist with a passion for marine life, balanced atop her paddleboard, scanning the clear shallows below for nurse sharks and stingrays gliding lazily over the sand and coral. Her camera hovered above the water, capturing every gentle movement, the sunlight refracting through the shallow depths, illuminating the world beneath her in liquid brilliance. The sea seemed calm, inviting, a place of quiet exploration, where human presence went almost unnoticed, yet in its vastness danger moved silently, patient and observant. Elise paddled slowly, her limbs cutting through the warm water, excitement stirring with each new sight. The nurse sharks meandered across the sand, slow and unthreatening, while stingrays glided like living shadows, barely disturbing the surface. She breathed in the salty air, feeling a rare calm settle over her, entirely absorbed in her observations, unaware of the long silhouette that had appeared beneath her board, gliding just out of immediate view. The shape was sleek, flattened at the head, enormous, nearly 14 feet in length. A great hammerhead, moving with an elegant, deliberate stealth that belied the latent power contained within its frame. The water seemed to shift beneath her, a subtle disturbance that she barely noticed until it was too late. Without warning, the predator surged upward with terrifying speed, the force of its movement striking her paddleboard and sending it tipping violently. She was thrown into the water, limbs flailing as salt stung her eyes and lungs, her body twisting in the sun-dappled waves, disoriented by the sudden fall. The board flipped, spinning in the shallow currents, and Elise struggled to regain balance, to orient herself, but the predator had already targeted her, circling in a low, wide arc as if evaluating its prey, calculating the strike with cold precision. The hammerhead lunged, jaws clamping onto her thigh with instantaneous crushing force, driving her under the surface in a violent arc. Pain radiated through her leg in sharp, relentless waves, muscle and skin shredded beneath the serrated pressure, while blood spread rapidly in the clear water, turning it into swirling clouds of red that glinted in the last light of day. Elise kicked and thrashed, desperate to free herself, but the predator's grip held. Each movement met with terrifying resistance as she felt the raw power of its bite, the sheer weight and velocity that could easily have ended her life in seconds. From the shore, friends saw the chaos erupting, scrambling toward the water with kayaks and paddles, calling out to her over the rush of waves. They struck at the water, paddles thudding against the surface, creating disturbance and flashes meant to distract the predator. The hammerhead, unnerved by the sudden flurry and the presence of multiple humans, released its grip momentarily, retreating just enough for Elise to claw toward a kayak. Her body trembled with shock and pain, blood flowing freely from deep lacerations. Her mind focused solely on survival, every sense alert to the predator's next move. The shark circled nearby, a dark silhouette against the fading light, measuring distance, assessing threat and opportunity, its behavior deliberate yet reactive to the chaos it had unwittingly caused. Elise's friends maneuvered the kayak with careful urgency, guiding her away from the shallow reef, hands pressing improvised bandages against the wound, each movement calculated to keep her as stable as possible while minimizing additional trauma. Finally, the great hammerhead veered back into deeper water, leaving only its shadow beneath the twilight surface and the bloodied aftermath of its attack. Elise was hauled onto the kayak, body trembling, pale from shock, pain coursing in waves with each motion. Her leg was mangled, torn deeply, the muscles and tendons exposed and bleeding heavily. Yet she clung to consciousness, aware of the fragile victory that allowed her to survive. The journey to the beach was tense and measured, every stroke of the paddle a reminder that the ocean remained indifferent, that even predators known for restraint could, under the right circumstances, strike with lethal potential when startled or provoked. At the hospital, surgeons worked for hours, repairing shredded muscle and tendons, stitching deep lacerations with painstaking precision, striving to preserve mobility and function while combating the extensive trauma inflicted by the predator's bite. The wounds left scars, both visible and hidden, a testament to the encounter, while the incident itself became a story repeated among locals, tourists, and marine biologists. Many noted the rarity of hammerhead attacks, emphasizing that Elise's fall into the water had triggered a deadly mistake, a collision of chance, predator instinct, and human vulnerability that nearly ended in tragedy. For Elise, recovery extended over months, the physical healing accompanied by mental reckoning. Every glance at open water brought memories of sudden violence, of the hammerhead's powerful surge, the sensation of being lifted and twisted, the shocking bloom of blood in clear shallows. Even as she regained strength and mobility, the experience remained vivid, etched into memory, a reminder of the fragile balance between fascination with marine life and respect for its raw, unfiltered power. Local guides and fellow paddlers recounted the incident as both a cautionary tale and a grim illustration of nature's unpredictability, emphasizing the conditions that could provoke such a rare event. For those present, the scene was unforgettable. The calm waters of sunset turned chaotic, human vulnerability exposed in a flash, and the apex predator's sheer strength demonstrated with terrifying clarity. Elise survived against overwhelming odds, but the memory lingered, a visceral imprint of what could happen when curiosity met the ocean's latent fury, and when even minor miscalculations in timing or position intersected with instinctive aggression. By the time she left Bimini, Elise carried not only scars along her leg, but a profound respect for the ocean and its hunters. The hammerhead strike, sudden and powerful, had transformed a tranquil paddleboarding adventure into an encounter with death itself, leaving her alive but forever changed. The waters remained beautiful and inviting, yet beneath their surface lurked an indifference that no precaution, camera, or leisure activity could entirely mitigate. A truth etched in blood, adrenaline, and survival that would follow her for a lifetime.